Hello, witches and magical souls, and welcome to Wayward Witchery. I'm Pandora Darkmoon, tarot reader, witchcraft mentor, and lifelong witch. This space is for anyone on their spiritual or personal journey, whether you're a curious beginner, have been dancing with the moon for years, or simply feel the magic without needing to name it. Today, we're diving into spiritual discernment, why you shouldn't believe everything you hear, especially in spiritual spaces where ideas, beliefs, and advice can sometimes become overwhelming. So, grab a cuppa, settle in, and let's get witchy. One of the most common pieces of advice in spiritual spaces is to keep an open mind, and I completely agree with that. An open mind is a beautiful thing. But I think we've forgotten the second half of that idea. Because an open mind is useful, an empty one is not. Somewhere along the way, many people absorb the idea that questioning things is negative, that judgment is harmful, and that spiritual growth means accepting everything uncritically. You've probably heard things like, if it resonates, it must be true, or don't judge, or just trust the universe. And while I do understand the intention behind those ideas, I think they miss something really important. Because discernment is not the enemy of spirituality. It is one of the things that makes healthy spirituality possible. The problem is not information, it's overload. We live in a world overflowing with information. Every day we're exposed to opinions, teachings, predictions, spiritual advice, self-help content, and endless interpretations of reality itself. The challenge is no longer finding information. The challenge is deciding what deserves our trust. This becomes especially noticeable in spiritual spaces. There are countless voices telling you what your energy is doing, what the universe wants, what your guides are saying, what your future looks like, and what every small coincidence means. Some of those voices are thoughtful and grounded. Some are sincere but mistaken. And some are simply very confident. But confidence is not the same as wisdom. And certainty is not truth. And honestly, sometimes spirituality online starts to feel like, if you saw 3 feathers today and your kettle boiled slightly louder than usual, congratulations, you are ascending into the 5th galactic timeline. And you're just sitting there thinking, I think I just need to descale my kettle. So yes, do open your mind, but not so much that your brain falls out. So let's have a look at judgment versus discernment. One of the biggest misunderstandings I see is the idea that judgment is inherently bad. But the truth is, we all judge constantly. We judge whether someone feels trustworthy, whether advice makes sense, whether something feels safe, whether a source is reliable. The problem isn't judgment itself. The problem is poor judgment. There is a very big difference between judging someone based on superficial traits and evaluating their behavior, consistency, and integrity. Discernment is not about rejecting everything. It's about learning to evaluate things more wisely. The goal is not to stop judging. The goal is to get better at how we judge and what we judge. Discernment is often misunderstood. People sometimes assume that questioning something means you're being negative, and that a disagreement means you're being difficult, and that asking for clarity means you are closed-minded. But I don't see it that way. Discernment sits in the space between blind belief and automatic rejection. It says, I am willing to look closer before I decide, not I refuse to believe anything, and not I will accept everything. Somewhere in the middle is wisdom. Because let's be honest, not everything wrapped in spiritual language is wisdom. Sometimes it's insight. Sometimes it's projection. And sometimes it's just someone confidently saying something that sounds profound at 2 a.m. on Instagram. Discernment cannot really exist without self-honesty, because it's very difficult to evaluate ideas clearly if we're not willing to look at our own biases, hopes, fears, and assumptions. Sometimes the hardest beliefs to question are our own. And sometimes the most important question is not, is this true? It's, do I want this to be true? Those are not always the same thing, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. Many people avoid forming strong opinions because they don't want to seem rude, difficult, or unkind. So instead, their default setting is to agree. Not because they are convinced, but because it feels safer. The problem is that if we never allow ourselves to disagree, we never really fully develop our own perspective, and we end up outsourcing our judgment to the loudest or most confident voice in the room. One of the most important things to understand is this: disagreement doesn't have to be personal. Two thoughtful, honest people can look at the same idea and reach different conclusions. That's not a failure of discernment. That's part of being human. You can respect someone and still disagree with them. You can value their insight and still not adopt all their beliefs. And you can be kind without pretending to agree. Respect and agreement are not the same thing. You can say, I understand your perspective. I've thought about it and I see it differently. That's not conflict. That's clarity. Discernment doesn't need to be complicated. Sometimes it simply means pausing long enough to ask, does this make sense? Is there evidence for this claim? Is it consistent with itself? How does this person respond to disagreement? Are they encouraging thinking or demanding blind belief? Do their actions match their words? And what does my own experience tell me? These are not cynical questions. They are thoughtful ones. Discernment isn't about certainty. It's about clarity in uncertainty. It helps us avoid manipulation, recognize exaggeration, notice our own blind spots, and stay grounded in reality while remaining open-minded. Spirituality and critical thinking are not enemies. They work best together. So yes, stay open-minded. Stay curious. Stay willing to change your mind. But don't hand your judgment over to someone else just because they sound confident, spiritual, or certain. Discernment is not a barrier to growth. It is one of the ways that growth happens. And in a world full of noise, learning to think clearly might be one of the most powerful spiritual skills we can develop. Thanks for joining me at Wayward Witchery today. I hope something in this episode brought a bit more clarity or perspective to your own journey. If you feel called to go deeper, you can explore tarot readings and other guidance sessions over on waywardwitchery.com. Until next time, keep your mind open, your judgment sharp, and your tea warm.